What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Heck versus Hell, where the truth we tell. Always want to start off by thanking each and every one of you for coming on here, and continually supporting these episodes as much as we can every Friday, I will say. I know there's been a couple hiccups here previously in the short past, but I still want to give thanks and always send out the love that you guys give to me. So I don't want to just feel like, all right, give me all the love, right? Give me all the love, and I'm gonna leave y'all high and dry. I want y'all to be able to communicate with us, And I will be honest, I don't have as much access to all the platforms. I know there's some platforms that I don't even know how to name. There's some platforms that I can't even access. There's just a whole lot of platforms out here. So please do remember that we also have an email, right? If you want to be proper, an email to where you could send out any type of message to us that I can access, that I can see, or our Facebook, of course. But the email is flipdaswitch, right? As we always say, flip the switch at reborn.com. So that's FLIPDASWITCH at REBORN.com. Just in case I don't see a lot of your messages, which I really don't. And invite you to come and speak with us, and give us points of conversation, things you want to hear about, things you want help with, things like that. Because we will start soon having some type of open dialogue to where maybe we'll have calls coming in. I believe Lex did that in the past. But we spoke about doing that too when it comes to different things like Truth Seekers Alliance, Truth Seekers Mastermind Alliance, things like that, to where we're both there. We can have any type of question. We're kind of live having these calls come in from you and, different types of interactions. So that's something that we're going to plan on doing here in the near future. And I'm sorry I sound so out of it. I had the intention of coming on here with a different energy, not as a down and gloomy energy, but I want to get down to earth. I want to open up some minds, because especially in this world, in these days, it's different. It's a lot different. And it's kind of painful to see. It brings me sorrow. Okay, not to sound any type of cliche or anything, but it brings me sorrow. It brings me sadness seeing how people really are and how they're wanting to be, and how the lack of education, the lack of knowledge, and allows us to be. And it comes a lot with society. I will say that a lot of society, because especially in Western culture, society teaches you to be selfish. Like, man, the adversary is working really good, okay? Because number one, they teach you to be selfish. So number two, they teach you different perspectives to become more selfish. And it's just super, super horrible. Because regardless of fact, yeah, we're getting buried. We're all getting buried individually. Most of the time, we're all dying on our own, and having that death experience alone. But that's a moment, a moment in time. Just like our life, it's a longer moment in time, but it's still a moment in time. And people are always looking at the immediate gratification, right, of what we can get. And that's why this episode is named Conveniently Hard Life. Because I love my oxymorons first off, but it comes with the point of trying to have a convenient life, but really you just make your life harder. Because one of the biggest factors, one of the biggest laws that everyone must abide in, no matter who you are, no matter what you are, is you reap what you sow, right? People call it karma. You reap what you sow. You're always going to reap what you sow. Regardless of the fact, that is something you cannot get out of, whether you are a physical person, living in the world, or you're a spiritual person. living in the world, right? As we always strive to be and push you to strive to be as well. That is a law that you cannot get out of because that is a spiritual law. Okay. So there is a couple of those laws, and actually, I'm going to make another episode of that. I had it wrote down previously. It was going to be focused on physical laws and spiritual laws, the difference and why there's a lot of things going on, and there still are a lot of things going on. There's miracles that always happen. There's always different types of things where people are called to have higher power. And just like the power that was given to us to do unto the world and release unto the world, that's still a thing. Because I'm not to the point where I can lay hands on people and say, "Hey, you're healed." Not yet, at least. But I have a gift to where I can smell people's intentions. Okay, so that's a difference in the physical and spiritual, because a lot of people would say that's something like a sixth sense, right? If you have something like that, we all got intuition, we all got a sixth sense, we all got that type of being. Okay, so there's gonna be a difference. There's gonna be a little breakdown that we do, but you reap what you sow is one that you never get out of. That's regardless if you're living in the flesh, if you're living in the spirit. That's a law. That's a stern, hard law. And God's laws, spiritual laws, those are much more above any type of fleshly laws, physical laws, right? Gravity, um, sinking in the water, generating things from your hands, just a bunch of different things. There's a difference in the laws, and it's what we choose to follow. Okay. But spiritual laws, you don't really have a choice. They're going to be there regardless of fact. So reaping what you sow is one of the biggest ones. And with today's world, we look more at immediate gratification, so we can't look into the future of what we're sowing, let alone what we will truly reap from these decisions. And I say that because, if you look at a lot of people today, and one of the most impactful and negative things that a lot of women especially put themselves through is super hard. And I say women right now because of this point of conversation. Okay, I'm gonna go into the men in a minute. Okay, so don't be taking sides or anything like that. But there's a lot of women nowadays, and I'd rather say females, because women are a higher level of category in my eyes. Just as a man, there's 40-year-old boys out here, right? You don't just earn the title of being a man. So females, there's a lot of them these days that go and they try to support different types of abortion, right? They try to support different types of decision. And we can go into a conversation back and forth, always going yada yada, whatever. That's gonna be something that most likely I will be getting challenged on, whatever, and I like challenges, right? But I don't want to go into that conversation right now, but not only that, if you really pay attention, a lot of the times there are females that will come and try to get a man for his money and either divorce him, get a child from him so that they can have a dead set income for the rest of their lives, which is trained. It's trained into us. It's trained into us as a culture. And unfortunately, especially our culture as minorities, we have a huge ideology of making that happen. And it's just horrible to see because it, sometimes it does look like they're having a good time. They're being successful in the ways that they're doing, but it's one of the biggest mistakes you're ever going to make. It's one of the biggest issues in this world because it causes a break in the hierarchy. It causes a break in the foundation that God ordained man to have. And it's so painful to even watch. There's a lot of females that go and they get away from, try to get an upper hand and become that, or they have a point where they don't want to submit, and not in a way like, hey, he's over here abusing you, physically abusing you, mentally abusing you. You should submit and stay there. Not like that. There's always situations where it's just not needed to happen, but that's why you need to be equally yoked. That's why first you need to be in a relationship with the one that can provide the relationship, because even one verse that I saw yesterday was that a man can give his sons wealth and houses, but only the Lord can provide an understanding wife. And that's so true. All good things come from the Lord. The things of real value come from the Lord. Okay. And God brings together people that are equally yoked, that have that properness. So a lot of people, they like to just hop in and out of relationships, constantly focus on other people, but they focus on other people for the wrong intentions. They focus on other people because of what they can do for them. Okay, so that's still under the narcissistic category. That's self-serving category, right? You're still trying to go look for this so that you can have this. I want to feel love. I want to feel X. I want to feel Y. I want to feel Z. That's what we are trained to do. Okay. And especially, in those scenarios, a lot of the times these young females, they have that understanding and they want to continue to push to have a quote unquote freedom, so they won't be chained down, so they won't. And really, that's where they don't understand, because a real married couple will tell you, that women is the one that runs the relationship for the most part, right? Just because we love and respect, that whole phrase, happy wife, happy life, that doesn't mean allow your wife to lead, okay? I'm going to say that very bluntly and very clearly. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. If you do that, your relationship may be headed down, to crash and burn. So it's always a fine line. It's always a good understanding of what is good, and everything has moderation, right? So it's when it comes to relationships, okay, that's still what I'm talking about. But going back to it, unfortunately, these females, they do this and they put their children in such horrible positions. Like, I've seen, there was actually this one guy that was telling a story about how his mother always tarnished his father's name, and from his understanding, what the mom had told him was that the father was a deadbeat. He never wanted to see them. He wasn't paying no type of child support. He walked out on them, XYZ. And come to find out, he actually goes to his father and he finds out, he sees all these receipts of child support. He sees that this is not what was happening. And that's a big issue that I also see and that I've personally experienced is the female turning you against the other partner, or turning you against the other partner. And it's not just females that do that to males, but also males that can do that to females. They try to turn each other against each other, turn the kids against each other. And that's what happened in that situation. And it was just to the point to where she was upset because he did not like that she had such low standards for herself, first and foremost, because that's what's really important. She didn't have any type of self-respect. She didn't have any type of self-value. She didn't have the proper values in place to say, hey, to where that man could say, hey, I do want to spend the rest of my life with you. And that could be something completely different. I don't know the entire story. It could have been him still trying it out, and him pushing her to become better, but the pressure, made her fold and run away. I don't know what happened. Regardless of fact, in a lot of those situations, they try to be to the position where they're living a comfortable life. So most of the time, they're not going to try to strive to be better. They're not going to strive to better themselves and improve their values and gain more knowledge and add value in a different type of way. And that's not to say, hey, get to work, ladies. That's not anything under that nature. It's to say you have to constantly improve yourself. Whenever you're not growing, you're dead. And whenever you're dead, it seeps into every single portion of your life. Once you stop growing, you stop living. That's really what it is. And a lot of females, and that's why I say the same thing about there's 40-year-old boys out here, 30, 40-year-old boys. I actually had a little a headbutt with a 44-year-old boy a couple of days ago, and we were on business, we were talking business, but he was over here like literally he threw a tantrum, and I had to respectfully check him. That's a whole nother story that we can go to, but it was so funny, and it just goes to prove my point even more that there are grown little boys that still walk this earth. Age really is just a number in the sense of maturity, because there's tribes over there in Africa that they're over here, doing tributes of rights that, you know, quite frankly, a lot of men wouldn't even do, and they're doing some crazy things, and they're what they start doing that at 11, 12, 13 years old. So there's a whole different way of living. And the unfortunate factor of what happens when, certain situations like this, whenever you go and you put yourself in a position where you're like, hey, I don't want to be chained down. I want to keep my kids, but you're going to support them from the outside so I can do whatever I want. That's going to cause such an effect on your children. And regardless of fact, a lot of the times when they do that, that means that they do have some type of love for their children. That may not always be the case, and they could be using them as a financial means of providing for themselves. There are people really narcissistic like that. But regardless of fact, if they do have that, at least a sliver of love for their children, the way a mother and a parent should always care for their kids, it's going to cause resentment. It's going to cause falters. It's going to cause holes in the mother and son and daughter relationship, because they're not going to have that proper foundation. There's too much of one. And just like I spoke before about hierarchies, females are more emotional beings. Men are more stern and having to think with their head, logical, right? We try to take as much emotions as we can out of situations, out of decisions. That may not always be the case. Of course, there's so many different types of men, so many different types of thinking and wiring that goes on, trauma that goes on that causes us to lean more one side than another. But for the most part, that is how God created us to be, right? So whenever you have that imbalance, which I've experienced myself, it's horrible. It causes a lot of strife. It causes a lot of issues in your life that you could have never foreseen, because it messes with the child's way of thinking, and one of the most beautiful thing that I have seen is, even if having a father in your life, even if it is some type of tough love, we all need that. We all need both parents. We all need the proper love to feel the proper sense of self-esteem that we need within ourselves. Because I mean, to be honest, I didn't get much of my dad growing up. Regardless, I lived with him, but I didn't get much of him. And I say that in the means of he was a hard worker, and he would go in at like 5 in the morning, get out like at 9 p.m. from working one job. There was a point where he had two jobs and he still had to come home and cook whenever I was really young. I remember I was like 3 years old, but he was an incredibly hard worker. And it was just really difficult to even see him, to experience a father because of that. Okay, because so that's another consequence too, that he didn't allow himself to elevate to the point where he needed to. Now I understand life happens and circumstances push us into a wall or a route that we chose not to take all the way, but we kind of succumb to it regardless. We succumb to the road that we're on, and it's the same way. He made those decisions. He made that choice, and he really didn't get to see his children growing up too much. He saw them physically, but he didn't get to see them. He didn't get to experience them. So I don't know what the pain he's going through. I don't know how he sees it, but I know that I missed out on a lot. I was really raising myself, as were my siblings. We were just together raising ourselves pretty much. We did have a caretaker, but really it was no different than being in a foster care, in a foster home where we got to see our parents occasionally, so it's not completely like a foster care, unfortunately, to where these children out here are just, not even getting to experience their parents at all whatsoever, but it's to an extent, it felt like that. It really did, because And that's what people don't understand, is they cause super crazy situations that you don't foresee. The same way, even when it comes to sex, right? People are out here having one night stands and having all these uh, things where they don't commit. They're not in committed relationships, and they're just having all these types of night caps, we'll say, and just going and doing different types of things, right? And I will say a disclaimer, okay, because I'm sorry, this is a little late, but I know there are some younger uh, people that listen to these shows, so that's why I try to keep it clean, keep it PG as much as I can. But in reality, that's what happens. And they most likely, you guys see that too, right? You see it out every single day, where it's always happening constantly around us, and they don't look at the consequences. Like I was saying previously, a lot of the times they try to go and have a means to get out of their consequences, a means to find a way to not have to experience the consequences of their poorly made decisions, right? Similarly to, I guess, one thing, and this is why people hate the perspective that I try to point out like this, because they call it victim blaming, right? And in the same way, I mean, if you're walking down, the night where it's a really high crime rate, regardless where it is, and you're walking over here with like a clear bag, right? You're walking with a clear bag, have a suitcase full of money, and everybody can see that bag. It's kind of your fault that you got robbed, because you made that poorly made decision, and that was a consequence of your decision. Similarly, how people go and they put themselves in positions. And I'm not saying, hey, put the fault on them. That's all their fault that they got blamed. But you understand where I'm going with this. A lot of the times we put ourselves in situations, and that's a huge means of what we need to realize is this society that goes on today. It teaches us to not take responsibility. And that's super convenient, but not taking responsibility is a huge part of what allows life to happen to you. So now you're allowing life to take on to you. You're not taking life by the horns. You're allowing life to happen to you. And it's a huge problem, because now you're going and flowing, and you're going in paths that you never even dreamed of. You're going in paths that you never even wished, that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. You're going and you're doing that because you chose to live a convenient life. So that's why I say a conveniently hard life. Okay, and it's really, really difficult to comprehend, but that's one thing that I really had to pay attention to, is every aspect of your life is the way it is because you allow it to be. Okay, because our life is only what we tolerate it to be. And I will say the devil's very, very smart, because they know just enough to give us problems that are tolerable. Okay, and this is where we can go back into the Revelation scripture of lukewarm. Um, but really, if you think about it, I mean, we're not gonna move if something is tolerable. For example, if you got a really bad job, well, it's decent paying, but you got a bad environment. You got someone that's always bad mouthing you. You got a boss that's always just giving you XYZ, and making you do things that even aren't outside of your pay grade. You're tolerating it. It's not getting you to the point where they're over here literally treating you like trash, treating you like a doormat, to the point where you say enough is enough. And that's where we get caught up on our day-to-day basis, because it's right there in the sweet spot to where we can tolerate it, but it keeps us distracted. And that's why I say a lot of people underestimate the adversary, because he's good. I'll be honest, he's really good. He's a very, very worthy opponent, should I say. But it's always a game, and that's one of the sub games that we have to pay attention to, is watching our day-to-day life, watching what we focus on, watching these little minuscule problems that really are going to be so insignificant later down the line. And that's another thing that I had to realize last night, and I'm about to spit a bar. Okay, I was up at 3 a.m. and I was thinking, what really goes on? And I want to ask you something. Maybe it could just be me, but I want to ask you something. Do you remember the most painful experience you've ever felt? Try to remember it. Physically painful. Most painful experience you've ever felt. If you can't, maybe the second most, but do this with a couple of your experiences that you felt where it's just physically painful. And try to remember what the physical pain felt like. Tell me what it felt like. What did you feel? Was it like a piercing? Was it a gunshot? Was it something so crazy to where, maybe you got a whole leg chopped off or somehow, there's crazy things that happen out here, okay? What was it? Try to experience it physically, okay? Tell me what it feels like. Now, let me ask you, do you feel it more emotionally, as in how it allowed you to feel? What was going on through your head, the experience that you felt? Or how are you interpreting the pain? Because I had to realize that one of the biggest factors, and this is another part of taking responsibility of our lives, but one of the biggest factors when it comes to these types of pains is it's always the interpretation of how we see the pain that really sticks with us. Because regardless of the fact, one of the most emotionally painful things that has happened to me was my uncle's death. And that happened, I believe some of you already know, but that happened actually whenever I was in jail. So I wasn't able to see him, to experience that, to fully be there for him as he was drifting off. But it was very emotionally painful, but I was able to really quickly shift my perspective because that's whenever I was already walking with God, and I was very quickly able to switch my perspective and feel and understand that the interpretation of that pain was to strengthen me incredibly. And in the same way, you can do this. It's not as a great analogy. It's not as a huge difference in analogy, but just like these lifters that are over here working out hours and hours on end, you think they don't feel pain? You think they don't feel the soreness and the ripping of their muscles? Because that's what soreness is. Feeling all this experience. There's some people that go and tear their whole pectoral muscles or bicep muscles, and I can't imagine that pain, physically. But how they interpret that pain is, okay, this is something that's going to make me stronger. With the soreness, with the ripping, with, pulling a hamstring, whatever it may be, pushing yourself to that physical limit like they do. They interpret it as, this is what's going to make me stronger. Now my body can tolerate more. Now I can keep pushing. And that's where mental toughness is so incredibly important. And I'm saying this is a bar because you have to understand every experience that we have, physical, emotional, whatever it may be, it comes from our interpretation that allows us to grow from it or stay wounded from it. In the same way, a lot of, back it up a little bit, but if you think about those physical pains that you had, how many of them can you truly say, oh, I remember, my toe was gushing out blood and how it stung and all this and that? The pain, it goes away. It's very, very temporary. The physical pain is very temporary, and that goes to show how physical is not as lasting as emotional, because emotions, they are a frequency. They are a spiritual concept. Just as the same way that God can experience love, God can experience sorrow, God can experience anger and wrath and all these things, it's a spirit. It's a spiritual concept, okay? Because we don't experience emotions through the flesh. We experience them through the spirit. We experience them through the soul, okay? So that is one of the biggest understandings that I had to break it down and really understand, so that we all could understand together how it truly works, how a lot of this pain, physical pain, is insignificant. And that's the same way of what a lot of people talk about, is like, hey, these hard choices, doing the hard things. And most of the times, the right things are going to be the hardest things to do. But doing the hard things in life is what will allow you to have an easier road, because you have the strength, you have the experience, you have the knowledge, you've been here before, you know how to attack it, you know how to do with it. But living in a convenient way, choosing the easy decisions, choosing something that will please you or self-serve you, it creates hard lives. Regardless of fact, that's why a lot of people, especially if you go into the personal development space, if you talk to different kinds of people, you'll hear alignment. Okay, that's one of the biggest things you're going to hear: alignment. And people follow that, like, they worship alignment. And it comes from ethically, right? It comes from the ethical alignment of what you are doing. It comes with following a set of rules. This is how they view it. Okay, let me just explain. It comes with following a set of rules of right and wrong, a moral ethic code. And that's what they call alignment. You have to be in alignment with the ethics of the code that they have written, quote unquote. And really, they're just following God's righteousness. Okay, so they're seeking the righteousness of God, but they don't want to acknowledge, hey, this is from God. This is written from God. This comes from understanding right and wrong from God, because if we didn't have that standard, we wouldn't know what right and wrong is. Back in the day, I don't doubt, if there were cavemen, I won't say, if there were cavemen, I don't doubt that if someone did something bad to the group, to whatever it was, they all sit there, they all beat them to death. I don't doubt that was something that they did. In the same way that chimpanzees do different things like that, and they go and torture some other chimps until they die. It's a whole standard of right and wrong. They believe that to be right. Hey, it's right that we should get rid of this guy because he's causing problems to us. He's making it harder for us. Okay, so it's a whole standard that we have and that even they live on. The most successful people, they have this understanding of alignment, of knowing to live in the righteous manner. So they call this alignment, okay? And that's where they understand that it takes discipline to live in alignment, quote unquote, to live the righteous ones, to make these right decisions, even though they're hard, to continuously push to become as righteous as you can be. Now, they're not going to call it that. They're not going to speak to you like this. Whenever you go seeking these type of things, and hearing other people talk, but this is what it is. Okay, it all comes from the truth, the spiritual truth. Like I was saying, the spiritual laws that are in place. And that's one of the biggest ones, because they understand you reap what you sow is a law that you cannot get around. So they're going to be in alignment, quote unquote. And I keep using their words so you can understand it. Because they understand, hey, we have to, be on the right path. So the things that we want, the things that we're doing, our business won't get messed up. So we got to stay right here, walk this straight and narrow, but disacknowledge what or where it came from. Disacknowledge who is behind, really in control of putting even this law in place. Because that's huge. Same way of how once we sin, we are doomed to death. Same way. It's a law. It's a law that was put in place. So a lot of these spiritual laws, they come from the commandments. Okay, those alignments, they come from the commandments. They come from understanding of God's righteousness. That's what they come from. And that goes furthermore to prove these people that disacknowledge God, or don't want to give the glory to God, they're still living under his rule. regardless the fact you cannot get out of them. That's why it's so powerful that we teach these kinds of messages and understandings that there is no authority higher than him. Okay? And I say him because that's one of the biggest terms used. You know, we're not going to say it. Then it. God is not an it. God is a person, okay? And that's one of the most powerful things that you can begin to understand and encourage you to continuously make the right decisions. Okay, so a lot of my standing is from experience. I will say that is from experience because I've gone and made a lot of wrong choices, wrong decisions, and been put myself in those positions to where it's like, hey, well, you know what? I'm here. Just like, you know, me talking about jail time. I was put in those positions because I was hanging with the wrong people. I was in the wrong place, but ultimately it was always my fault. I got to be responsible for my life. And that's where inconvenience could be, because that's a huge responsibility. It really is. Being responsible for your life is a huge responsibility. That's why even whenever you see these people that go and they try to, you know, even go on strike against like plumbing companies, fossil fluid companies, all these fossil fuels, all these things, you know, they're trying to go against them. Really ask them, hey, do you live on your own? You know, have you ever paid a bill in your life? You're going to see 9 times out of 10, they have no type of experience. A lot of their knowledge, a lot of their experience, quote unquote, is secondhand experience. And that's one of the most dangerous experiences to have because you're not right there. You can't interpret it with a brain. You can't go and actually put it into place and understand why it was put in your life. Okay, that's why one of the biggest things I say is everything is either a blessing or a lesson, because we have to be able to interpret these things the way it's given, not the way we want to see it, not the way we want to pity ourselves, but the way it is. Okay, because once emotions get involved, once we step into that seeing and how it is, that's why people can come outside. That's why they have different therapists, because they can see it from a very neutral point of view. And nowadays, even the therapists are getting tainted. Nowadays, even the therapists are coming and having their emotions put into place. Whenever I was coming on my journey with God, walking on my journey with God, I was doing the most to take my emotions out of it, to take myself out of it, because that's your ego. And ego is etching God out. And that's one of the biggest issues that you can do, is try to put yourself, put your ego, put your knowledge, your experience, your past, whatever it is, you know, you put yourself on such a pedestal to where you have emotions tied into your ego. You have emotions tied into your flesh, into your experience, into your self-image. And once you start putting yourself with those things, you're either going to look at it as, oh, this happened to me because the world hates me and the world is out to get me. This happened to me because poor little old me, you know, everything's always happening to me. I can't ever get a break in life. This happened to me because these people around me are doing XYZ. But I'm a good man, you know, whatever it may be. Once you start putting your ego in it, you can't look at it in a neutral point of view. And really the way I perceive it, because I always see a lot of these things and situations as an analogy, as a picture, as a scene. And one of the ways that you can perceive it is whenever you do that and you view your experiences in the moment, it's as if you are going and looking at it from a first person point of view. And every time, the more you disconnect yourself, it becomes different to the point where you just elevate. You literally see it from a point of higher sky, a point of going up and seeing down on it, so you can get the full picture, so you can get the full understanding of what it really is and what it really was meant to give. Once you do that, once you detach yourself from that situation, from that moment, from that experience, that's how you can see it. And that's how it was meant to be given. So I really encourage you to continue to analyze yourself on a day-to-day basis, continue to see it, and check where you need to grow. Because I'm gonna be honest, I can go on for more and more and more, but I want to give it at increments. This is already a pretty good size message, and I want to be able to absorb it with you and have all of you absorb it the proper way. Okay, even if you got to listen to it in 2-minute intervals, pause it, listen, think on it, ponder on it, whatever whatever works for you. Everybody's different, but we definitely got to absorb this all the way because it's really essential. It's some revelations that I'm getting on a day-to-day basis to be able to even see these situations from different layers, from different angles, from different point of views, from different understandings, and attack it so that it can continue to be embedded into us. So a lot of our episodes, well, my episodes may sound redundant, but we have to be able to look at it from different points of views, different layers, because we could listen to something 6 times, but that 7th time is when it clicks, when it's like, oh snap, I get it now. And then you can go back to those previous 6 and say, oh, right, and you just keep learning, you keep making it more powerful and making it a part of your foundation. Okay, so I just want to say, please take this in, listen to it, apply it, and see how it changes your life. Okay, because this is something that's really life changing. And I mean, please do reach out. Please do get in communication with us. I would love to see some emails, talk about them here. Name some names. I'll start naming names. Giving shout outs. Hey, shout out to Lex from Minnesota. Hashtag Mayo Clinic, start doing things like that. Just to show my love more so. If you don't feel it directly, I want you to be able to experience that and be here with us. Join us on the journey. I don't want you to just be outside looking in. I want you to be in here with us, okay? So I love you all. Thank you so much for listening to this. I hope that you each have a good rest of your day. Best really good weekend, because I know this is probably on a Friday. And I will catch you on the flip side.